welcome and thank you for joining us this evening for a wonderful Pride Month chat. We are really happy to be here from all over the whole world, sharing this digital space together. I am just really happy to see so many familiar faces that I've met along the journey of writing this book, but also excited to see just as many new faces. And of course, as always, we want this to be a welcoming and inclusive space for everybody. So, if you do have questions or comments, we just hope that you ask them in a kind and generative spirit. You listen to each other with patience and assume that we all have good intentions, even if we use a wrong term, a wrong pronoun. But let's also be open to learning and growing and changing our actions when we learn something new. My name is Jake Newsome, and I consider myself a queer public historian, trying to bring LGBTQ history, high level academic LGBTQ history beyond the walls of the ivory tower to the public, beyond the classroom. I have written recently a book called Triangle Legacies, and along the way I was able to meet a just plethora of wonderful, dedicated, passionate scholars, but also educators and activists, archivists from all over the world. And so what I wanted to do for Pride Month was have this space for all of us to come together, and folks who either have read the book or are just interested in the book and the history of the pink triangle as an LGBTQ symbol can come and actually have the chance to not just ask me as the author about the book, but also several folks who are featured in the books as well. So to kick off this conversation, what I would like to do is share a quick story about what led me to write this book. I and my family are not Jewish, and so I didn't have a direct kind of family connection to the Holocaust. I didn't learn about it in high school. And so for some ways, it's kind of a, looking back, I'm like, how in the world did I get kind of stumbled on to writing this, dedicating my academic career to writing this book about not just the Holocaust, but the legacies that the Holocaust has had on queer activism decades after the fact. But I will, as any good historian, take you back in time to a moment when I must have been around 19 or 20 years old and was doing some homework in the university library, which is honestly where I spent most of my time as a college student. And it was late one night. I needed to get up and stretch my legs to just take a little bit of break from the homework. And so I decide to start wandering around in the library, and I'm just wandering aimlessly up and down the library stacks, when all of a sudden the title of the book on a shelf just really jumps out to me, and I remember stopping and looking around to make sure that no one was around to see me take this book off the shelf, because I guess at this point I should mention that I went to school and grew up in rural southern Georgia, in kind of the Southern Baptist Bible Belt of the South, and grew up at that point very closeted. The only time I had heard about gay people was on Sundays at church. And so the book that had stopped me in my tracks was, the title on the spine was Growing Up Gay in the South. And I remember thinking, like, is someone just talking to me right now? And so I pulled the book off the shelf. And as it turns out, it was a collection of oral histories of, I don't know, probably 30 to 35 LGBTQ folks who had grown up all across the South, and they were telling their story about, making the decision to live openly and truly. And well, first of all, I was too afraid to check out that book. I was afraid that it might like go on my permanent record or something. I had no idea how that all worked behind the scenes, but I didn't want anyone to know that I had checked out that book. So I read it that night in the library the whole time, read the whole thing. And then I went back night after night to that section and read as much LGBTQ history as I could. And so in that way, queer history for me really gave me the courage to accept my identity and have the courage to come out. It was the first time that I had seen other people like me represented in a positive light or in a self-affirmative light. And it suddenly made me realize that I wasn't alone, and that there wasn't just queer people existing with me right now, but we had been here since history began. And so at that same time, I had begun studying the Holocaust as a history major, and probably towards the end of my studies, I realized that out of all of these classes and years of studying the Holocaust, I had never learned anything about what happened to people like me during the Nazi rule. And I asked my professors, why is that the case? Everyone told me, well, there's just no information on it. No one talked about it. Maybe you can study that when you go off to graduate school. And so I thought, you know what, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I went to graduate school, began studying what happened to LGBTQ folks under the Nazi regime. I was learning in particular about the pink triangle, which was the badge that queer men and trans women were forced to wear in the concentration camps. At this time, I was in graduate school in Buffalo, New York. I went from Southern Georgia all the way to Buffalo, New York. So talk about quite a culture shock and a snow shock for sure. And one night in Buffalo's little gayborhood, the gay district, I was in a bar, and I saw up on the wall pink triangles being used as decorations. And I thought, wait a minute. I just learned about the pink triangle in concentration camp. Surely this is not that same pink triangle. It's just a coincidence. And then not too long after that, Lady Gaga released her song Born This Way. And in the music video, she opens the music video dancing in a pink triangle. So suddenly I'm kind of struck with this dichotomy of, how did this symbol that started as a badge of damnation in Nazi concentration camps become a symbol of queer culture, decorations, pop culture and music videos, decades later. So that led me to researching this book, the book that I thought was going to be only about queer people in the Nazi regime from 1933 to 1945 suddenly became a book about a symbol that spanned over 100 years and multiple continents. I will also say that, I'm so thankful that the research for that book led me to interview dozens and dozens of just fantastic people, some of whom who are on the call tonight. And I always consider it one of my life's greatest pleasures or things that I'm thankful for, that I got to speak with so many of these wonderful people and personally thank them for the work that they've done to help our community and really give me the chance to have the life that I have today. And so I want to show one quick picture before I open it up for discussion. I recently went back to my home university to do the book launch for Pink Triangle Legacies. And while I was on campus, I went back to the library and decided to go look for that book that I had found that had started me on that journey so long ago. I was able to trace it down. They had moved it to a different portion of the library, but it was still there. I was able to find that same book, and just what a surreal feeling to know that my own book on queer history would be on those shelves alongside this one somewhere. And I'm not going to tell the librarians who are there at that university. Hopefully they're not on the call, that I did inscribe a little note to anyone who happened to pick up that book in the future. So again, thank you for just allowing me to share that story as a way to set the stage for how and why Pink Triangle Legacies came to be. As I said, I want to open this up for questions from the audience. So actually, before we turn to our special guests, I want to see if there's anyone has any questions or comments that they want to share with the group and get the conversation started. I will also try to keep track of the chat as well. Yeah, go ahead, Gary.
Thanks, Jake. And yeah, you know, it's interesting. I also learned about being queer going to the library. So, you know, yay for the libraries. And we actually have to admit that they are an important part of our community as well. My question is, my husband and I actually have, it's not a pink triangle, but it's got the rainbow symbol in it that we've had for 28 years in our window. And we've had some comments from people saying, well, aren't you just reiterating the trauma of Nazi Germany and the anti-homosexual movement at the time? So my question would be, how have you dealt with that? What's the perception that you've had of individuals? Because we also know that we can reinterpret symbols and you know, make them our own. So.
We have.
No, thanks, Gary. That's a great question. Then, in fact, the questions about resistance to the Pink Triangle's use in gay activism is something that I've asked all of the special guests when I was interviewing them for the book. So if they have something they want to mention, feel free to jump in. I think that since the earliest instances where the Pink Triangle was used by gay activists, beginning in the early 1970s in Germany, there were people who also said, you know, queer people who also said we should not use this symbol, because essentially some of the arguments were that there's no amount of reclaiming that we can do to this symbol to ever separate it from its origins as a symbol of victimization, right? And from, at least from what I've found in research, that same question or impetus was what spurred Gilbert Baker to ultimately design what became the rainbow flags. And Corbin, we were just talking about that before the call got started, in 1978 with the rainbow flags flying for the first time in San Francisco. Gilbert spoke very explicitly about this idea that the Pink Triangle was powerful. You know, surely it came with a strong historical warning, but that it would always be rooted in the Holocaust, in victimization, and was created by oppressors. And so he wanted something for that the LGBTQ community could create as their own, and take pride in, without having to go through that process of kind of cleansing or reclamation first. So I hope that answers your question. I think that, you know, still today, there's probably folks who feel that way, but also, you know, folks that say, you know what, it's because it was created as something negative that makes it so much more powerful when we flip that meaning on its head.
Jake, can I add a little bit to that?
Absolutely.
Because I was telling Jake beforehand, I was in San Francisco in 1978 on Gay Freedom Day, and I actually brought my little button, which I'll actually try to show. People tell me it's right side up in the picture, although to me it looks upside down. But if you can read it, it says Gay Freedom Day 1978 in San Francisco, and I was there that day when the rainbow flag first flew. And I do remember, and I'd forgotten this and then reread about it. And thank you, Jake, for putting this idea in my mind. The original flag had 8 stripes with pink at the top, and then the regular rainbow flag. And I had always thought, I do not know if this is correct or not, but I always thought that pink stripe was the sort of deference to, like, this is where we came from. I do not know that. I read later an explanation that they dumped the pink color simply because it was really hard to find pink cloth. And then they just settled for the Roy G. Biv thing until very recently. But I don't know. I always thought it was a very clever thing. I mean, and being in San Francisco when I first saw the inverted triangle, I always thought it was, first of all, it was Harvey Milk who I first saw that. Said silence. Well, I mean, it didn't, silence equals death. That's a little bit later on. But 1978, he sort of reminded people, remember what happened to gays in Nazi Germany. And even then, I think that the triangle was flipped. And I've always thought that's very important that you flip the triangle, that you turn it upside down. So anyway, just having said that, I thought that's, it's a very important, but thank you for also acknowledging the controversy. I think that that also is important to do that too, so.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Go ahead, Morgan.
Yeah, I have a very different feeling about this. I think that we need not to forget the pink triangle. We need not to forget what happened in Nazi Germany. Now more than ever. I don't think we need to let go of reminding people about that. So I don't have any issue with using a black triangle or a pink triangle. And I found a couple old buttons here from New York. Heritage of Pride triangle pointed down, and then this one, that was 82, this one's 84, a voting button. Right. And again, triangle pointed down. And then of course the archives design, which I also have on my t-shirt, which I designed in the 80s. And we wrote about it in the newsletter at the archives too. And please, I have two colleagues here, Paula Grant and Joan Nessel. If you want to hop in and add anything, I would be delighted for you to do so. And Lisa Davis is also here, and she knows a bit of history too.
Oh, wow. That's
so
wonderful to have y'all here with us.
You know, in a lot of ways, I feel like in a way, it's reclaiming like we reclaim Dyke. Because Dyke is used against people that were often then beat up with that word. So I mean, it's part of a reclaiming, it's part of a remembering, and it's a way of communicating that part of history for people that go, why the pink triangle? What is that even about? Because as we move further and further away from that fascist regime, we don't know where we're headed at this end. And I think it's good to keep the triangle alive and with us.
Perfect. Thanks, Morgan. Go ahead, Crystal.
I just wanted to add that, like, I found the pink triangle through my work with ACT UP San Francisco, which I also want to remind people was a time when people openly and proudly started using words like queer. Queer nation, for instance, or even like fags and dykes, all words that had negative connotations in the past, right? And I think for me, in any case, and a lot of us in ACT UP and Queer Nation at the time, those two things sort of came together, reclaiming the pink triangle, but also reclaiming words that had been used against us. And so, to me, I see like a real line there, a through line of a history of reclaiming words that have been used against us in the past. And I also would say that, you know, I've seen that also in other marginalized communities as well. So it's not just something that we've been able to do. As I said, I've seen that in a lot of marginalized communities.
Thanks, Crystal. Morgan, you showed us the shirt that you were wearing and the pin that it was on. You know, that design was on as well. when you told me the history behind, your thinking when you designed that, especially with all of the words, in case folks couldn't see it, it has all these different words and languages for the word lesbian, if I'm not mistaken. I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about kind of the inspiration for that design.
I was trying to make a t-shirt design for the archives, and I did not want to have any artwork of a single body representing the lesbians of the world. So I was trying to figure out a way to make it inclusive. And this seemed a way to do that, to step away from a design of a person or faces or anything like that. And of course, with the archives, there's a lot of resources there to do research, even in the 80s, which was an early time to be finding stuff. There were not a lot of books out then. They were coming, but we had access to a lot of material there in terms of our global collection. So there was already a start of words to use and add to this design. We were aware of the black triangle being used for deviance, different from the pink for gay men specifically. And so we'd also written about that in one of the newsletters. And I don't know, Joan, if you want to hop in here, if you have any more specifics on this, but the other piece of it is we also marched every year in the Gay Pride Parade carrying word signs that were more slur and slang language for lesbian. Like muff diver and things like that, rather than just the language for lesbian or something approximating that. So we'd already been playing around with collecting words a lot. And in fact, right now I've got 2 or 3 or 4 more words that I've got to figure out some way to redesign this and get them on the grid so that we can expand it more. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and it sounds like if folks know slang lesbian terms in other languages, they should get with you to maybe include that on the new design.
They could send it to us at the archives webpage on the info Gmail. It'll reach us that way.
Awesome. So if I just want to remind everyone, if you have a question who for anyone, either in specifically or just for the group, you can feel free to raise your hand or drop it in the chat. I did see a question come in from Jason. When was the triangle first flipped upwards? And I will say that when the triangle was first kind of reclaimed as a symbol of activism, it almost always reflected the original use, where the peak was facing down, and that was so. It was first reclaimed and used in Germany in early 1970s, 1972, 1973, and even when it came to the United States, it was also usually used with the peak facing down. But the group that first kind of made the conscious or unconscious flip where the peak is facing up was the Silence Equals Death Collective, which I will just, I guess, give a shout out with the shirt that I'm wearing. And the poster and the symbol was then adopted by the group ACT UP just about a month or a year after it was designed. I will say that I was able to interview some of the members of the founding members of the Silence Equals Death Collective, and so I don't guess that they would mind me sharing the story. But it turns out that the turning of the triangle upwards for Silence Equals Death was an accident. They had given tasks for each of the collective members. There were 6 of them. Everyone was supposed to do their own part. The guy that was told to go research how the triangles looked in the camps, I guess didn't do that research, and so they printed out the posters with the triangles facing up, and they put them all over Manhattan. And then they started getting some pushback, in particular from the Oliver Wilde Memorial Bookshop, and they said, "I'm not going to put that up because it's historically inaccurate. The peak is facing the wrong direction." And so suddenly these 6 activists were like, "Man, we just spent all of our money. What do we do? Do we take them all down and reprint?" And one of them said, "You know what? We wanted to kind of create a difference or a separation from the original Pink Triangle anyway, because we didn't want people to think that we were just reclaiming it wholesale. So you know what, let's own the fact that it's facing a different direction as a way to kind of symbolically invert the victim narrative. And so then that the rest is history. Really, the Pink Triangle facing upwards just really took off after that.
That's actually kind of Jake, is a nice way of saying necessity became the mother of invention, which is fine. I mean, there's no particular wrong with that. I wanted to remind all of our viewers, and Jake knows this much better than I do, that the last vestiges of paragraph 175 of the anti-gay laws, which the Nazis did not invent, that was in there beforehand, but the Nazis greatly expanded that was not taken away in Germany finally until 1994, and that was already 5 years after the unification of Germany, and the last anti-Roma laws, anti-Gypsy laws were taken away in the 1980s. So this is truly an example of we were the very last people in some sense to gain recognition and to finally get rid of those things. And a lot of other things went beforehand when the Americans came in 1945, but that one stayed on the books all the way up until the 1990s. And that just shows you just the compressed time period that we're talking about. So anyway, I just wanted to, that much better than I do, of course, but I want to be sure our viewers knew it too.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Corbin. I see that Joan Nesselwell from Lesbian Herstory Archives has her hand raised. So go ahead, Joan.
I have many feelings of everything that's going on, and I'll reserve some because, okay, but first, there are other communities that have not been reclaimed. Sex workers died in huge numbers. They had to dig their own graves, their records, in their sex working outfits, and then were shot to fill in the trenches. Communists in large numbers, socialists were killed. So I just don't want us to oversimplify things, or I have to say, and I'm going to just get it out early because I know no one's talking about this, but as a Jew, that there are okay, it's hard to say, and I don't want you, Jake, to think, but as an anti-occupation Jew, okay, there are lessons that have not been learned. Mm-hmm. And sometimes by the very people who suffer the history in the first place. Mm. So this has to be part of this discussion. Yes, we're honoring an anti-Semitism is a huge force in the world, and it's coming back now in America's fascism, along with racism and homophobia. But to learn really what that pink triangle means is to understand the extremes of nationalism. Mm-hmm. And I don't want queer nationalism. I don't want lesbian nationalism. I don't want trans nationalism. So this is a very complex time.
No, thank you so much for that, for that, Joan. I think you are absolutely right that sometimes, especially when communities are reclaiming some of these symbols and are using history as a tool for activism or social justice, only some of these lessons are incorporated, and some can be either accidentally or, is more often the case, intentionally overlooked. And I think that you're right. In order for us to truly learn from and incorporate the lessons of the Holocaust, right? We have to look at all of the complexities, including those areas where we as societies today have failed to understand the lessons, but also failed to implement them or act on them rather. Absolutely. Yes, Jose, please.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you, Jake. Thank you for inviting me to be here. I mean, the first time that I hear about the Pink Triangle was in Atlanta, Georgia. And I remember the ACT UP and another groups, they have it as a symbol. But then I moved to Washington, D.C. and a few of the Latino groups that we have in Washington, D.C., they use the Pink Triangle as a form, as a tool of education, and also to come together to fight for our rights. I have many things of the Pink Triangle. I get this banner. We used to have a library in Washington, D.C. called Lambda Rising bookstores in Connecticut Avenue. And we have many pink triangle like this, or even the poster from the 1993 March. But I think for many Latinas and Latinos, the pink triangle was very powerful, you know, just to come together, to educate people about our rights, about immigration, about our identities. And I'm very happy that you wrote the book, Jake.
Well, thanks for that, Jose, and thanks for sharing. Oh, you know what? I was actually just about to ask you about that. Could you tell the group, Jose, a little bit about this organization, Triangle Rosa, that you formed in DC?
Yeah, I co-founded this group in the mid-90s. So we were meeting in DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C. To help many Latinas and Latinos to, you know, to work with the issues of coming out. And I see that that was very powerful, you know, symbol for many Latinas and Latinos. So we met in DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C., and we provide support to many people that were in the closet. We talk about immigration issues, and we talk about lesbian issues. And the community. So
Oh, it seems like we might have lost Jose there. Hopefully the internet lets him back in. Lets him unglitches Jose, bless his heart. Well, while we are waiting on Jose, you know, I wanted to again open the space if anyone else wanted to either ask. I have lots of questions I want to ask our guests for the sake of our attendees, but I also just want to give folks the space to do that themselves. Well, while you're, oh, go ahead, Morgan.
This is on another story that I found incredibly powerful. And I was in DC for, I don't know, something in the 80s. I think it might have been the 80 whatever National March. And I lived in DC for a while. I know Mary Farmer over at Lummus. We were in the same coven. It was that kind of time. But I'd gone down for a journalism conference, and as part of the arrangements that we had for what we were doing there, we had access to the Holocaust Museum, which I think had just opened recently. And as a special favor, treat, whatever for us, they had a small glass case in the entryway, and in it was a real badge from the camps. I think it's the only one in existence. And it was just, breathtaking to see in that context. It was really amazing. And I think, you probably can tell the story of how it was rescued and came to be available for us to see. And it's,
Yeah, absolutely. I know that Triangle, I've had the I guess the fortune, I've had the experience to see it myself, and it's another one of those kind of serendipitous moments where someone had reached out to the museum as it was. I think it was in its very first year or so, the year before it opened to the public, and reached out to one of the archivists and said, my partner has passed away and has left some stuff from the war. I'm wondering if it might be of interest to you all. And so, of course, the archivists were doing a little bit of research and said, who was your spouse? They looked him up and they said, oh, well, this is, they realized that the spouse, again, it was all under pseudonym at the time, but had been arrested and sent to the camps for being gay. And so the collection team thought, well, this is a really rare opportunity. And so when they flew to Vienna, met with the surviving partner, and they opened up a shoebox. It was everything that his name was Josef Kohut, who had passed away. Everything that he had from his time was in that box. And the archivist, or the collector's name was Klaus Müller, opened it, and on top was the Josef's pink triangle. So to this day, it's still the only surviving pink triangle that we know of. And so how lucky it is that we also can trace it to a specific person and be able to tell that powerful story to visitors, to people, to the online exhibit as well. So actually, speaking of the museum and pink triangles, Corbin, I was wondering if you could tell us the story of your first time at the museum in was it April of 1993, and the experience that you had there, especially like in the Hall of Witness and getting your ID card.
Sure. You just reminded me of that very vividly. I'm sure that a lot of you came from DC or been around for a long time will remember the big gay and lesbian. There was one in '87, but this one was in '93. A lot of people have forgotten the fact that the Holocaust Museum opened the same weekend that the Gay March was on Saturday, and the museum opened on Sunday for the public. They'd opened one day earlier for only dignitaries. There was Bill Clinton and the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu and all that, but for the public, it was the next day, and I was on opening day. And of course, the city was filled with hundreds of thousands of all of us. And that opening day, the place was filled. They opened up at that time. If you were familiar with the museum, and I'm sure I know many of you have visited, some of you haven't, but up on the second floor is called the Hall of Remembrance. And the Hall of Remembrance is now a kind of an open place where there's earth from each of the four death camps, as well as the candles on the wall. You can go and light, have some quiet time or some prayer. At that time, you can walk around. At that time, you couldn't. At that time, it was sealed off, and there were these sort of balustrades around it that you could walk around, but you couldn't walk into the main thing. What people did was they made little cards, and they had pink triangles and superimposed upon yellow stars, because that was, of course, the Nazi symbol for if you were both gay and Jewish, because the Nazis were obsessed with classifying people. You had to be in some particular category. And people just took those little cards and wrote them on the spot, and they had little pink and yellow measure markers and threw them on the floor, and the floor was covered with them on that very first day. And myself, I mean, each of us, when we go to the museum, and those of you who've been there know what I'm talking about, you get an identification card of a person not necessarily a person who died. A lot of young people come to the museum and they think, oh, this is somebody who died. Well, not necessarily. There's many survivor cards of people who actually got through and came to the United States and resettled. But the survivor card that I got, or not the survivor card, but the identification card of someone who went through the Holocaust on that first day, was not of a gay person, not of a Jewish person, but if it was a Dutch gay man, Willem Arendeus, and I read his biography, and at that time they had computers upstairs and you could go and do the research, and I went and looked at him. He was a member of the Dutch underground. He was a forger. His specialty was forging Jewish identification cards, which he did. And then he and a group of the Dutch resistance blew up police headquarters. They blew up the Gestapo headquarters because that's where all the identification cards were located. And it was necessary to destroy old identities in order to create new ones that were believable. Well, he was arrested for it by the Gestapo. When he was taken, he was in the street and he turned to his own neighbors and he said out loud, "This is so that you know that homosexuals are not cowards." And they took him off and he was executed. It took the Israelis 40 years, but he is entered now into the Hall of the Righteous, which is the Israeli commemoration for those who were non-Jews who rescued Jews, who didn't get paid for this. They just did this. There's, I think, 40,000 names so far. So we have his record in the Holocaust Museum in Washington. But anyway, that made a tremendous impact on me, and it connected things. And I'm always very appreciative that was, to me, that was a part of the founding spirit of the Holocaust Museum, that there was this Jewish story, and yet there were these other stories, and the museum was linking them. And if those of you who come to the museum, it's taken down now, I think, because they're redoing the wall. But if you go into the main exhibit, there's the names of donors right up against the wall. And the second one on the list, etched in stone, is Gays and Lesbians of America, or Gays and Lesbians and Their Families, I think is the full thing. That's also, every visitor who comes sees that. So anyway, thank you, Jake, for asking that. That's a very powerful experience. To this day, it still really affects me very deeply.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Corbin. So it looks like we have Jose back, and we got cut off there. So I want to make sure that you have time to finish telling your story, Jose.
Thank you. Yeah, well, basically, when I moved to Washington, D.C., I moved in 1993 for the National March. But yeah, in 1996 and 1997, we created the group Pink Triangle or Triángulo Rosa. And, that was like a great group to educate another Latinas and Latinos, to support each other, to educate. And that was for Jewish Latinos and not Jewish Latinos. That was for everybody. So we support each other. But recently, I found some t-shirts and brochures from some Latinas and Latinos from the 1987 March. So I found these t-shirts. So I discovered that we were not the first one using the pink triangle. There were another sisters and brothers, but I think the legacy of the triangle is very powerful, not only here, but also in Mexico City. I'm working with the groups of Mexico City, and they also using the pink triangle as an educational tool and also as a memory of what happened, in the past. And in case that you want to know more about the Latino community, please visit my website. Is JoseGutierrezArchives.org, and I have a few items there, but I have a lot of posters, brochures, banners, that we can use to learn. But thank you, Jake, for inviting me to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, Jose. I know we're coming up on 7:30, so if anyone has to drop off right at 7:30, feel free to do so. I think you know, for those of us who do have an extra few minutes, I did have one more question that I wanted to or point of discussion to raise with Crystal. So if we do have a few extra minutes, you're invited to stay with us. But if not, absolutely, we understand. So Crystal, when we talked, we had this really, I think, provocative, good conversation about how you had, I guess this would have been in the late 80s, some like ambivalence around the pink triangle as a symbol of activism, especially as it was associated with ACT UP. And for you had, and this always stands out to me, you had mentioned that the black triangle stood out to you as more maybe powerful, intersectional in a lot of ways. And so I'm just wondering, you know, if you could share some of those thoughts with us for conversation here. Oh, you're on mute, Crystal. That's how it always goes.
Right, the phrase of the century. Yeah, Jake, thank you. Yeah, it wasn't so much in the late, it was more like, I would say like in the early 90s, after I've been in ACT UP for a while, and had also done some research around the pink triangle, which then led me to the black triangle. And for me, I always looked at it as more of a, you know, that poem that a lot of people talk about, the Then They Came For Me poem. For me, the black triangle sort of held that idea that, and I think this is very pertinent to what's going on today, that, you know, outside groups or people who are like marginalized by authoritarian governments and fascist governments, that group doesn't shrink, it grows. And I think when I think about the black triangle, I think about that fact that it was a, you know, like, you know, yeah, it was prostitutes, people that were seen as degenerates. And to me, I see that like today when I think about like the way the homeless has been, you know, dehumanized, and now also trans folks and you know, and queer folks, right? And the fact of the matter is that it doesn't stop there. And I think this is a lesson that hasn't been learned from the Holocaust, is that, again, you know, authoritarian circles and fascist circles, you know, it tends to be a thing of kicking more and more people out of the circle so that that circle of power is smaller and held in less hands. And again, like I said, I think we forget that sometimes, is that, you know, that it's important to see that, you know, they really first started coming after people who, like I said, who were considered degenerates. Because, I mean, I'm not a historian, let me say that first. I'm not a historian, I'm not an archivist. I like to collect things, but I'm not successful. But the one thing I do, I do study like sort of history and things and patterns, right? And this is one of the patterns that I think about in the Holocaust. And I think about then also who has the power to create symbols as well, right? Because again, one has to wonder, why didn't the Black Triangle have more prominence? Yeah. And I would say it was because the people it represented. And then like I said, it's always about who has the power to create and write history, right? And so, yeah, I'll show you all my little bit of history that I have, which is this magazine. Let me see if y'all can see it. It's a magazine, a zine, actually. One of the first zines, it was called On Our Rag. It was a takeoff of On Our Backs and Off Our Backs. And the writing on it says, incite to riot, wreak a havoc, and pose a threat. And to me, again, that's one of the reasons why I became more interested in the history, not more interested, but I saw that as an important lesson. First, in who has the power to create symbols, and secondly, like sort of who gets left out of the sort of stories of symbols. So yeah, I think that's basically what we talked about, Jake in the book, and yeah.
No, thank you so much for that, Crystal. I think that's just, I think also gets at many of the questions that Joan brought up earlier when she commented about the lessons that often we haven't learned yet. And I just, no one could have said that better than you, Crystal. So I really appreciate you sharing those thoughts with us. I also, it made me think as you were speaking, and then I was just thinking back to Joan's comment. I want to share my screen again one more time, because if folks aren't familiar, I think it's important to kind of put that pink triangle in its context, right? That this was not the only badge that was used in the concentration camps to label, to label the prisoners. You might have seen this chart or a variation of it before, but this was developed by the Nazis and was used in the different camps as a color-coded triangle badging scheme, so that they were able to mark and brand and divide and conquer, essentially, all of these different groups that they deemed as outsiders and not belonging to this new national community that they sought to create. So you can see the red for political prisoners, green for what they called career criminals, purple for Jehovah's Witness, pink for, it said homosexuals, but we know that it was used essentially for all men who had sex with men, but it was also used to mark trans women, because the Nazis didn't recognize trans identities as legitimate. So a trans woman would have been treated as a gay man. But then at the end, you can see this black triangle that, as Crystal was saying, was kind of this miscellaneous, if you are a social deviant and don't already have one of these colored triangles for you, like you're going under this black triangle. It was called asocials. And so I think, if I'm, well, let me now stop sharing my screen so that I can see everyone again. That is one of those lessons of the Holocaust, that we have to not put the persecution of one group at the center to the exclusion of understanding the history of the other persecution of the other groups, and how nationalism, anti-Semitism, all of these forces of marginalization can just really devastate entire communities out of those who are not considered part of the so-called in-group.
Jake, I think you're actually being almost a little kind. I remember the other synonym for the black triangle, which the Nazis used this term very frequently, was useless eaters. That tells you exactly, these are the people that they couldn't figure out what to do with, but who were still consuming food, which tells you everything you already need to know.
Yes, right.
At any rate, could I share a positive story from a long time ago? It almost sounds like ancient history right now, but in 1980, I was a delegate. I wear many hats in my life. I was a delegate to the Texas State Democratic Convention. And this was about a year and a half after Harvey Milk was assassinated. And I was I wasn't living in San Francisco anymore. But some of the things that he had said just still continued to reverberate inside me. And that was this: every gay and lesbian person must come out. I mean, to him, this was like a commandment. Because the only way this will change is if people know who you are, your own personal stories. So at this convention, I was a delegate for Teddy Kennedy, and we were going to send a platform into the National Political Party. Well, two people, I was one, there was another guy named Mike, I don't remember his last name. Somehow we got it into our heads. Someone introduced a gay rights platform to the Democratic Party. Texas, gay rights. I mean, this was still the land of Connolly and Lyndon Johnson and cowboy hats. And actually, Texas was still a Democratic state. It was on the way out. But at any rate, they gave us time to go and talk about the issue. And we divided the state up between us. We're just two of us. I don't know why what gave us the idea that we thought we could pull this off. He was kind of a cowboy. He says, I'm going to go to West Texas. That's where all the cowboys, ranchers, cattlemen, that's where all those people are. You go stay in East Texas. And I was from Houston. And East Texas at that time was most of the delegates were overwhelmingly African-American, politically moderate, but very socially conservative, Southern Baptists. Well, I got up there, and this is a big gymnasium, and I went down on the floor and I started talking about Martin Luther King. I don't even remember what it was I said. Even as I was talking, I thought to myself, I'm probably coming across in a very condescending way, but I don't care. I was speaking in front of about 150, 200 people. Not one person would look me in the face as I was talking. They all looked away like this. And I just remember, well, you know, you gave it the old college try. And meanwhile, my friend, he decided to have a sense of humor instead. So he went to West Texas and he just thought, and he stood in front of these cowboys and he said, if you all support this gay rights measure, I promise you that the sheep in West Texas are going to suffer a whole lot less. And all those cowboys, they thought that was funny. They slapped their thighs and they thought, well, what the heck? And when it came time to vote for it, guess what? They voted for it. And when it came time to vote, the parliamentarian had asked us this, don't just raise your hands. I can't see you. This is an enormous gymnasium in Austin. Go stand up and so that I can be able to count the votes. So I ran down and I looked up at all my little East Texas thing. Is somebody going to do something? They all stood up, every one of them. And most of them faced me and they raised their hands. And I never forgot that particular moment. It just took the breath out of me. And when the parliamentarian, she declared the vote, she said, the measure has passed. And there was a gasp in that entire auditorium. I mean, just literally like that. And to this day, I cannot tell you, was that from friends? And we had lots and lots of friends. Or from people who thought that Satan had just walked in through the door and taken over the Democratic Party. But Texas was the largest Democratic state, and that year, I don't know what Jimmy Carter did with it, but we sent a gay rights platform to the National Democratic Party. And what I got from this is never hesitate to ask people for support, because they're going to surprise you. They're going to support you maybe when you least expect it and when you need it the most. And that I've tried to let be a guide for me all this time. And right now, we all need each other as allies and friends. After Supreme Court ruling today, and I don't know where to start with, but we need one another, and that's just something that I think it's possible when you come together, you can do really amazing things. So I just wanted to, story from long ago, but thanks for allowing me to share that with you all today.
Yes,
Thank you, Corbin. June, go ahead. I see you have your hand up.
Can I?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. First I want to say I want to just thank everybody, all of us, as you just said, Corbin, being in these struggles. I'm 83. What I see happening in America, I'm in Australia now. I live here, but what I see happening in America is that I can't believe how quickly things are going backwards. I can't believe how quickly scapegoating, which was the Nazi technique, has come to such power. I want to talk about another community, and it was the useless eaters, which that whole concept, which was the disabled community, which we haven't even mentioned, but so many, and as Crystal said, the unwanted, the deviants, those who are not physically fit. And the other thing that struck me, and this is when I was looking at that taxonomy of triangles, you know how we use the phrase intersectionality? Well, you know, the Nazis were perhaps the first to do intersectionality, because their triangles superimposed were the historical coming together for them of everything that made someone not human. So yeah, so I know I come across, because I'm so, to me, we have, you know, what's happening to queer Palestinians, what's happening in the name of Jewish safety. All of this is on the borders of our conversation and will hit us from our own communities of imperiled history in very different ways. So it's finding unity, but not oversimplistic unity. It's finding the courage. I'm sorry. I'm just honored to be here with all of you. We can be complex and we can be strong.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Joan. And we're so happy and thrilled to have you here with us. And I think you are absolutely right that even though the Nazis or even the far right today would never use the term to describe their attacks, they are intersectional. And so our resistance and our responses also have to be intersectional, and we have to build these coalitions across our difference. I love what you said, that it's not an oversimplified unity. We can be stronger because of our complexity, but if we are going to truly face this, we can't be single issue movements. Okay, I think I see Lisa has their hand up. Thank you again, Joan.
Well,
Hi, guys.
Lisa.
Let me just remind you all what you already know. As the man said, first they came for the communist, and they came for the communist here in the 1950s. It's taken a while because Martin Luther King sacrificed his life and a few other things to change the world, but they don't like progress. And we need an organization of political note to get rid of these people. Otherwise, they can take over. They're taking over, and that is their plan. And we have no organization because they got rid of it. The communists were bad, the socialists were bad, even the Democratic Party is dangerous. So I challenge you to figure out what we're going to do next, okay? But we may have to do something next. I'm sure Joan knows what to do, but she's in Australia. And you look great, kid. So like I said, first they came for the communists.
Yes.
And we need an organization of all of us against the evil ones, because they intend to get rid of it. It was like in the concentration camps, as I've noted, they sent the old people and the children. They kept the ones who would do work, because I know survivors who worked in, they were making weapons in the camps, and that's what they did with the teenagers and whatever. They gave them jobs, just like they do here. As long as you're capable of slave labor, they will let you live. Not well, but they will let you live. The rest of us, who the hell knows? So thank you for your book. I just happen to have a few copies here.
Thank you, Lisa.
And thank you for this, and thank you for this opportunity to say what I said, okay? Give them hell, give them hell.
That's right. Give them hell. Absolutely. Well, look, I know we're at 7:45 now. Folks have already given us more of their time than I initially asked for. And so I just want to thank all of the special guests, as well as everyone who logged on, on a random Thursday, again, Thursday night or morning. I guess Joan is with us from the future and Friday. But I do want to, as we're wrapping up, our special guests, if you have any kind of last minute thought or comment that you would like to make, I want to make sure that you have that space to do so as we wrap up.
I want to thank you, Jake, as many have, for pulling this book together, getting it out there, doing the hard work, the deep work, and then making it accessible this way. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. All right. Well, again, I appreciate all the work that y'all do and joining us this evening.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks again. And I hope you all have a good rest of the evening, night, morning, or day, depending on where you are. Stay strong, everybody.
Thank
Stay
you.
strong.
Bye.